Did you know one simple stroke of the presidential pen can create well, a law of the land that costs you billions and completely bypasses Congress? Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack this. Our mission today is a deep dive into this dramatic rise of executive power, and importantly, how recent efforts aim to restore some fiscal sanity and maybe constitutional balance. We're drawing from a specialized stack of sources here, really focused on executive overreach, trying to show you how Washington, D.C.'s biggest battles, the ones affecting your money, often happen without a single vote on the Senate floor.
In that centralization of power, that's really the key story, isn't it? Since the start of the Republic, we've tracked, get this, over 14,000 formally recorded executive orders. But what's truly alarming, is how modern directives, the EOs, the memoranda, proclamations, they've become increasingly legislative. They're acting like laws.
So they're usurping Congress's power.
Exactly. It's the Article 9 lawmaking power leading straight into Article 2 executive power. It's a fundamental shift.
Okay, so here's the immediate news hook. This brings this big constitutional conflict right to your wallet. In August 2025, we saw something pretty historic. The use of a pocket rescission package, aiming to cancel a staggering $5 billion in federal funding. Just like that.
Right. And this wasn't just some random bookkeeping entry, not at all. This was the executive branch specifically targeting funding across USA, the State Department, and explicitly labeled by critics as, and this is their term, woke, weaponized, and wasteful spending. So it's the constitutional fight over presidential limits being applied directly to real-world taxpayer dollars. You see the connection.
Wait, hang on. Can we pause on that term, pocket rescission? You said it's historic. First use in 50 years, really. Why is that such a big deal?
Yeah, that's the critical detail here for understanding the context. A pocket rescission, at least in this context, it means the presidential action of canceling funds without asking Congress first.
Without approval.
Exactly. The executive branch basically says, look, I'm refusing to spend this money Congress gave me, and Congress, well, you don't get a say in stopping me. It directly challenges a law from the 1970s that was explicitly designed to stop presidents from doing exactly that.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and pretty contentious, I imagine. Presidents often claim this unilateral authority comes from Article 2, right? That kind of vague executive power idea. And for decades, sources say Congress has either, well, deliberately delegated its own power away, or it just stood idly by while presidential power surged, especially after big crises like the World Wars.
Right. And that power, once it's granted or taken, it never seems to fully snap back.
It doesn't reset.
No. And what's fascinating, or maybe worrying, is that the ability for a president to just issue a directive, no debate needed, no procedural acts, no passage through both houses, it clearly degrades the rule of law. And democratic accountability, too.
Yeah.
When a president can just declare, stroke of the pen, law of the land, poof, the constitutional balance is, well, it's shattered.
And this specific $5 billion fight over spending, you're saying it connects directly to a constitutional battle that's actually centuries old.
Yes, absolutely. The power to impound funds.
Impound.
Impound.
Yeah.
Historically, the power to impound, which just means refusing to spend the full amount Congress appropriated, that was understood as a core Article 2 executive power, seen as necessary for efficiency. Presidents did it routinely, from Thomas Jefferson back in 1801 right up through Richard Nixon.
Nixon used it a lot, didn't he?
He did. Critics point out that Nixon, in just 1 year, impounded more than 7% of domestic appropriations, a huge chunk.
So if presidents had that power for like 170 years, how did Congress manage to just strip it away in 1974? Didn't Nixon fight back hard?
Oh, he did. But in 1974, Congress pushed back harder. They passed the Impoundment Control Act, the ICA. And the ICA fundamentally flipped 170 years of spending doctrine on its head.
How so?
It basically mandated that the president must spend every single penny appropriated, unless Congress formally approves a rescission, a cut.
Which Congress rarely does, I assume.
Often ignored, yes.
Yeah.
So the ICA didn't just strip a power. It shifted the whole burden of proof. It went from, why should we spend this, to how can we possibly stop spending it? And critics today argue that restoring that inherent executive ability to just stop wasteful spending, the old impoundment power, is essential for fiscal responsibility.
Okay, so we've got the constitutional mechanism being challenged here. Let's look at the policy side. Why did critics label that targeted foreign aid spending woke and wasteful? Sources argue trillions spent since 1960 on this official aid. Well, it's largely failed.
Yeah, and if you connect this to the bigger picture, government-to-government aid, that's the official development assistance, ODA. It's almost financially irrelevant now compared to private money flows.
Really?
Yeah, private financial transfers to developing countries, they dwarf ODA by like 20 to 1.
20 to 1.
Think about it. Global remittances, money people send home, that's over $700 billion a year. ODA donations, less than $150 billion. Private citizens are now sending 5 times more effective aid than government transfers.
That just raises a massive question, doesn't it? Why are U.S. taxpayers still bankrolling these seemingly inefficient government-led transfers, especially if they don't enforce free market principles?
Exactly. That's the core question critics are asking. And this rescission, it highlights specific examples of what they call woke excesses within that budget. The biggest cut, $3.2 billion, came from the U.S. Development Assistance Account.
Okay.
And this was targeted specifically because it funded programs critics deemed antithetical to American values.
Right, we saw some pretty incredible details about specific examples cited in the sources we looked at.
We did.
Yeah.
Critics pointed to $400 million a year for what they called global climate grift. Things like the Barbados Blue-Green Bank Partnership.
Yeah.
And while it sounds almost comical, examples cited as having no value to American taxpayers included funding for, believe it or not, baking and beauty therapy projects in Zimbabwe.
Baking and beauty therapy.
Yeah. Now, that example sounds small, maybe silly, but it's exactly what critics point to when they question the effectiveness, the oversight of these massive aid budgets.
And, while critics label these specific programs woke, we should probably acknowledge there are other groups who see them differently,
Sure.
as essential tools maybe for diplomacy or long-term stability. But regardless of viewpoint, the Democracy Fund was also hit hard, right? $322 million cut.
That's right. Targeting activities labeled as interference or promoting divisive social agendas. Things like funding for gender-responsive governance.
There was that specific example from South Africa, too.
Yes, a prominent one cited was $2.7 million intended to advance inclusive democracy in South Africa. It went through a foundation that published materials including an article titled The Problem with Whiteness. So these examples, they really show the scope of the ideological battles embedded in foreign spending that this executive action was trying to address.
And finally, on the foreign aid cuts, UN peacekeeping funding was also slashed.
Yes, due to cited failures, waste, and abuse, including, disturbingly, thousands of credible allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse by UN peacekeepers themselves.
That's awful.
It is. And the sources also noted a $30 million investment in Niger that, well, it ultimately failed to prevent the 2023 military coup there, underscoring the waste argument.
Okay, let's shift gears. Away from foreign policy waste, let's look inward now at domestic executive orders that critics want overturned. The principles seem the same, though, fighting executive overreach that shifts government priorities without Congress weighing in. What domestic policy areas are the top targets for this kind of constitutional restoration?
Well, a primary focus seems to be restoring accountability to the federal workforce itself. The civil service system, critics argue, has become sort of an elite island of protection.
Meaning hard to fire people.
Extremely. The federal firing rate for poor performers is only about 1/6 the rate you see in the private sector. That's because of layers and layers of bureaucratic protections.
1/6 the private sector rate. Wow. So essentially, we're paying for potentially 5 times the inefficiency that private companies deal with.
That's one way to look at it. It's seen as a huge drain on efficiency and taxpayer money. So, critics want to repeal Biden's EO 14003 and reinstate some Trump-era EOs that were designed to streamline the process for firing poorly performing federal workers.
Makes sense.
The fight over EOs in the federal workforce, it really boils down to accountability. It's not just shuffling boxes on an org chart.
Okay, let's move to something that hits everyone's wallet directly. Climate and energy policy. What specific executive orders are critics saying are driving up consumer prices?
The target here is pretty clear. Revoking EOs like 13990 and 14008, critics argue these mandates artificially constrain the supply of oil and natural gas.
Less supply.
Means higher prices. They say it directly increases energy costs for consumers. It's a direct link.
And the constitutional complaint here is that things like adhering to the Paris Agreement or setting these huge net zero emissions targets, these are massive economy-altering goals.
Exactly. They argue these are major policy changes.
Right.
And that kind of comprehensive national policy, it should be debated, maybe ratified by the Senate, definitely passed by Congress as legislation, not just imposed unilaterally by a presidential directive, which kind of avoids public debate and legislative scrutiny altogether.
Okay, one last area, regulation and cultural issues. How do EOs affect the sort of hidden costs of compliance for businesses and individuals?
Well, they often hide those costs, critics would say. They're calling for the revocation of EO 14094. That would actually change the regulatory review process itself. It raised the threshold for what even counts as a significant regulatory action.
Making fewer regulations seem significant.
Right. And it also reduced the discount rate used in cost-benefit analyses.
Okay, translate that. What does reducing the discount rate do?
It basically makes future benefits look bigger compared to present-day costs. So it makes it easier to justify regulations that might have very high upfront costs but speculative benefits down the road.
So effectively, it allows a more aggressive regulatory agenda to maybe bypass strict fiscal justification? Empowers regulators more?
Precisely. That's the argument. And then on cultural issues, EOs 11-46 and 11-1478 are targeted. These are the ones that mandate affirmative action requirements for federal contractors and in federal hiring. Critics argue this amounts to an expensive, discriminatory policy. Their view is that it forces government contractors to discriminate based on characteristics like race or gender just to meet statistical goals or quotas.
So the push is to change those.
The objective cited is to amend these EOs to ban statistical measures of discrimination entirely and focus solely on proven cases of individual intentional discrimination.
Okay, so stepping back, what does this all really mean? We've seen the fight over executive orders, presidential directives, whether it's about foreign aid waste or domestic regulatory costs. It seems like it's fundamentally a battle over core principles: limited government, fiscal responsibility, and, I guess, who really holds the power to legislate in this country? Congress or the president?
Yeah, that's it. This constant, almost unchecked growth in presidential power exercised through these unilateral directives, it fundamentally undermines the whole system of checks and balances. It tilts the scales. Restoring the presidency to its constitutionally limited role requires two things, really. One, the executive branch using tools like that pocket rescission, maybe impoundment, judiciously to stop waste. And two, crucially, Congress needs to stop delegating or just ceding its authority. They need to step up.
But the track record for Congress stepping up on this, it looks pretty dismal based on the sources. They show Congress has only legislatively overturned just four, of the more than 3,500 recorded EOs issued between 1945 and 1998, and none in the entire 21st century so far. That just underscores how incredibly difficult it is to claw this power back once it's shifted.
It really illustrates that the current political structure, the incentives, they strongly favor unilateral action by the president. It's easier.
Which kind of leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Since Congress seems so reluctant, maybe even unable to act effectively, is the only practical solution left for a future president who wants to restore that balance? Is it to use the very tool of unilateral executive action, the executive order, to aggressively dismantle the overreach created by past presidents?
Yeah.
Essentially, do you have to fight fire with fire?